Hey everyone, it's Kirby with Rooted and Rising. I'm here today just to tell you about a new recipe. This is going to be a banana bread recipe. So if you have those bananas that are looking kind of brown and kind of sad like mine are, feel free to join and let's get cooking together. Hey everyone, so to start off this recipe, we're gonna go ahead and get some butter melting. So for this recipe, we're gonna do a half cup of butter, which is gonna be about it's gonna be one stick of butter. This is a double, so I'm gonna go about half. I've already cut some off of here, so we're just gonna estimate about half. With this recipe, it's not rocket science. You don't have to get everything just perfect to make it come out good. So don't sweat the little stuff. All right, and while that is melting, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our dry ingredients prepped. So for the dry ingredients today, I milled some 150 grams of soft white wheat and 150 grams of spelt. And I did it on the fine setting like I usually do. This is a quick bread, and so it kind of helps it to be a little more tender and flavorful. So to this, what we're gonna do is we are going to add in 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. And again, not rocket science. So there's one, there's about half. Then we're gonna do 1 teaspoon of baking soda. There's that. And what we're gonna do is also add in 1 teaspoon of salt. This is a fine salt. I would recommend using a fine salt so that it dissolves evenly into the batter. And then after you have all this together, give it a little mix just to get everything nice and incorporated. So after you get all that mixed, now is a good time to go ahead and get your cinnamon. The recipe that I'm going by calls for 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm just kind of dumping it in there. I bake with my heart a lot, so whatever feels good to you, get that mixed in there, and then kind of whisk it together to get it all incorporated evenly. With this mixing as well, it helps to kind of separate or disperse all of the baking powder and baking soda that we added in there so we get an even rise at the end. Now what we can do is we can get our measuring cup and go ahead and start on our wet ingredients. Wet ingredients are going to start with 2 whole eggs. One trick that I like to do to just keep my area a little cleaner is to go ahead and bring a paper towel so I can put the shells on there, and it also keeps some of the gunk off of the countertop. But we get those mixed in there. This is a good time to also go ahead and pre-beat those eggs. We don't want to put a lot of air in them, but we want to go ahead and break those yolks and kind of get it all mixed together so we're not trying to get everything incorporated while mixing it into the flour. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my measuring cup on a scale, and with all of these other ingredients, I'm going to go by weight. So with the first ingredient that I'm going to add to the eggs is going to be buttermilk. With buttermilk, I'm going to go with 160 grams, and I'm going to mix that right into those eggs. Feel free to use yogurt, sour cream, kefir, whatever other kind of substitute you want to use. This is just what I had in the fridge, and so I'm going to go ahead and get that all mixed together. Next, I'm going to get my sweetener. Today I'm going to use honey. Feel free to use cane sugar, any type of sugar that you have on hand. And I'm going to put 200 grams of this raw honey in there. This is a really good one. It's from a town about 2.5 hours from where I live. It has a really, really good flavor to it, so I like using it for baking. And since honey is a little thicker, what I like to do is go ahead and get my fork, or you can get a whisk, and go ahead and kind of pre-mix all of this together. Okay, so now that we got that mixing sped up a little bit, we are going to move on to our next step. And that's going to be mashing those bananas. So with this recipe, it calls for 3 ripe bananas. Mine happen to be larger. It's great with smaller. You can, I've done anywhere from 2 to 4 very easily. The more bananas that you do add to it, it's going to add more volume. So just be aware of that. I have, unfortunately, added too many large bananas, and I have overflowed my loaf pan before. So if you are just trying to make one loaf, I would try to stick with about 3 of the kind of larger or medium-sized bananas. If you are going to use this recipe in a muffin capacity, go ahead and add however many you want. It's just going to add some extra moisture, some sweetness to it, and you can, make your muffins however large you want them. So pretty much what I do is just put them in a little bowl and get a fork, and I just kind of mash them up. Goal with the mashing is if you want it to be more incorporated, so you'd want it to be where you don't see as many bits and pieces, go ahead and just mash and mash and mash. You can use a fork like I am. You can use a potato masher, spoon, whatever you want to use. If you want a little more texture where you see some little bits of banana, feel free to do what I'm doing and kind of mash them a little less. Of course, I'm not going to leave any big chunks, but I'm not going to spend just a crazy amount of time on mashing up those bananas. As you can see, I'm just kind of mashing them up, getting them all nice and ready to add into those wet ingredients. Now you can just add that right into your other wet ingredients that we've mixed before. And then get your fork and go ahead and mix that together. This recipe is a great use of those bananas, and really you can utilize any fruit in this. You can use apples, you can use blueberries, just add in whatever fruit that you need to get used. That might be kind of getting a little out of its prime. You can just add it into this recipe and it'll add some moisture and some sweetness and some flavor to it. Now what I'm doing is getting that melted butter from the stove, and I did not cool it all the way, so I'm going to kind of mix it in as I go so I don't scramble any of the eggs that I have in there. I should be safe since everything is a little more on the cooler side, but just to be careful, if you don't want scrambled eggs, go ahead and just mix as you pour the melted butter in. Now I'm going to move that over to the side, and I'm going to grab my loaf pan. So this loaf pan is a 4.5 by 8.5 loaf pan. It is glass, and so it's going to be one of those pans that has a higher tendency of sticking. With that, I'm going to get just a little knob of butter and just use my hands and get in there and just kind of spread that all around the edges. Butter is a great kind of pan lubricant. I have used coconut oil. I've used spray Pam. I've used ghee. But it seems like the best thing that has worked the most is going to be butter. Go ahead and get in there and just kind of get it in all the nooks and crannies. You don't have to worry about, big chunks being on the outside. It's not going to matter. It's going to melt and going to make the bread all nice and delicious. Also, at this point, I like to give myself a little backup just in case if the butter does not help with all the sticking that might occur. And I'm going to grab a piece of parchment paper. The size of parchment paper that I'm looking for is something that's going to be the width of the size of the length of the pan, so the long side. And I'm going to kind of place it in there, and I'm just going to coin this as my little saddle technique. So with this, I'm going to turn my pan over to where you can see it, and I'm going to push that in, use that butter to kind of help that to sit in there. And one great thing about the parchment paper is that once you have it in there and touching the butter, it just kind of sticks there. You don't need to put in any extra butter or anything. It just kind of sits in there, and it's just like a little extra insurance, as you could say. Now I noticed that I forgot to add vanilla. Recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of vanilla. I have my homemade vanilla here, and I just, like I said, again, I just kind of measure that with my heart. I don't really take the time to get out a measuring spoon or anything and really measure that exact. I just pour however much comes out, and it all tastes great. And so now I'm going to add in the wet ingredients into the dry. And so just pour that in there, kind of pour it slow because it can kind of splash up if you pour it too quickly or from too high. Scrape out as much of that as you can. And then you can grab a spoon, a fork, a spatula, a whisk, whatever you have. I like this little flat whisk. It helps me to get around the edges, and you can fold it in, gently kind of work it in. With the grains that we used, I'm not as concerned with it, making my bread tough because these are very low gluten grains. And so what you can do is just mix until you don't see any big clumps of dry flour remaining. So as you can see, I'm working around the edge of the bowl, mixing it together. I'm not going super slow. I am mixing it. And here I'm going to kind of lift up and see, you see that little bit of flour that kind of popped up from the bottom. I'm going to make sure all of those big flour pockets are all mixed together. And that looks good to me. And so what I'm going to do now is going to turn on my oven to 350 degrees, and I'm going to let this batter sit for about 15 minutes. All right, so the oven is preheated after about 15 minutes. And so what I'm going to do is grab my loaf pan, and I'm just going to pour this batter into there. It's very important to note that whenever you do pour your batter in, do not overfill your loaf pan. It will overflow, and it will make a huge mess out of your oven. So what I'm doing is I'm pouring in, making sure that it still has about 1.5 to 2 inches on top in order for it to rise up and cook properly before it overflows. Take this from experience. It is a total mess to go into the oven and clean that up. And so this is what it looks like after it's in the pan. And I'm going to show you a little trick that I learned from a friend. Basically, so have y'all wondered how these bakeries get that kind of like bakery crack down the middle of all of their muffins and all of their loaf pans, or all of their quick bread, loaves? What they do is they go ahead and get some butter, and they just do little pats of butter all along the middle. And what that does is it melts into the top layer and causes that kind of baker's crack up on top of the loaf pan. And it kind of gives it a little better aesthetic. But if you don't do this, it's still gonna turn out fantastic. This is one of my favorite recipes for banana bread, and I think you'll enjoy it too. All right, everyone, it's been about 75 minutes in our oven, and with baking times, I started at an hour. I would recommend starting at an hour and adding extra time if needed. With glass, it's very common for you to need to add extra time to it, but basically bake it until you can stick a toothpick in the center and be able to see, you know, a little bit of crumbs. A little bit of oil is perfectly fine on the toothpick, but we don't want wet batter coming off. So my plan right now is to let this kind of rest in the pan for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then very carefully, I'm gonna grab our little parchment paper saddle that we created, and I'm gonna lift it up and set it on this cookie sheet or cooling rack in order to cool the rest of the way. And I'm really excited. I don't know about y'all, but with that butter trick in the middle, we do have that kind of bakery crack down the middle, and to me it looks really nice. So I'm going to continue doing that for these little quick breads. But if you do that or have any experience with that, please let me know in the comments. You know, what works good to you. What do you like to top with? This is very customizable. This is kind of a canvas recipe. Inside you can add fruit, you can add nuts, you can add chocolate chips, you can add really anything on the inside, whatever flavors you like with it, you can definitely do. Hey everyone, I just want to thank you so much if you've made it all the way through this video. Please give me a like, comment down below, tell me what your favorite thing to add into banana bread is. And if you make this recipe, just, you know, share your experiences. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the recipe down in the description below so that you can create it yourself. Also, feel free to customize the grain mix. You can do all soft white, you can do all spelt, you can add in some einkorn, something that doesn't have a lot of gluten, like hard white, hard red. Kamut would actually be really good as well, or corazon. Whatever recipes y'all like to come up with, just please comment down below, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.